A space shuttle from the Life Foundation lands in East Malaysia as the movie begins. When emergency personnel arrive, they only find one survivor, astronaut J.J. Jameson 3. When Jameson is placed inside an ambulance, the object that had become attached to him has come to life and is attacking the other passengers, flipping the car over and forcing it to crash. Michelle Lee plays an EMT who has been infected by the symbiote and emerges from the wreckage. We are introduced to reporter Eddie Brock in San Francisco, where he resides with his fiancée, Anne Wang, a lawyer who will be defending the Life Foundation and its CEO, Carlton Drake. Eddie is well known for his television news program, The Eddie Brock Report, where he conducts investigations for the benefit of his audience. As Eddie arrives at work, his employer sends him to speak with Drake but instructs Eddie not to question Drake about his work. Anne poses the same question because she is aware of Eddie's temper issues, which led to his expulsion from New York. Eddie discovers an email on Anne's computer that has details on 3 deaths that were definitely caused by the shuttle catastrophe. Eddie goes to interrogate Drake about his space travel program against his orders, but deviates from the plan and starts to inquire about the fatalities and how he is accountable for them. Anne separates from Eddie after being dismissed as well. The EMT returns to Malaysia and stumbles into a neighborhood market where he begins to devour an eel. As the seller reprimands her for it, she slices his throat with the blade that the symbiote has formed around her arm. The symbiote releases quills that kill anyone who tries to assault her in retaliation while she is being watched by nearby onlookers. The symbiote then releases the EMT and hooks onto the elderly woman as the EMT approaches her. 6 months later, Drake is carrying out studies on homeless people as part of his ongoing study on symbiotes. To give the impression that he is undertaking some kind of groundbreaking mission for humanity, he speaks to a single subject under the name of Isaac. Drake allows a symbiote to infiltrate Isaac's body and then releases it into space, prior to convulsing and the symbiote leaving Isaac's now dead corpse after consuming his organs. He initially appears to be in good health. Eddie is now unemployed, alone, and residing in a rundown apartment in San Francisco. He visits a local store where the clerk, Mrs. Chen, is someone he knows, but Eddie notices that she is continually being stolen of her money by a thug, and he is powerless to stop it. Dr. Dora Skirt, a scientist from the Life Foundation who is horrified by Drake's experimentation on humanity, then approaches Eddie. Eddie declines to assist her since he no longer cares about what happens to others, despite her request for his assistance in exposing Drake. When Eddie visits Anne at her apartment, she is returning from a date with her new boyfriend, Dr. Dan Lewis. Eddie tells Anne that he misses her and that he believes Drake is to blame for what happened to him while they are alone. Anne responds by telling Eddie that he is the one to blame for having reached rock bottom. Afterwards, Eddie calls Skirth to invite her to join her quest. Eddie is smuggled inside the Life Foundation's headquarters by Skirt. Eddie records the horrific exhibitions of the symbiote's victims on camera. One of the live ones is Maria, a homeless lady Eddie is familiar with. He recognizes her as one of the living. When he tries to free her from her jail, Maria attacks him. Eddie flees after the symbiote in her body attached itself to him. Eddie is being pursued by security personnel, but he manages to escape thanks to what seems to be improved strength and agility. After Drake and his group discover Maria's body, they are aware that a symbiote specimen is still at large. Odd symptoms begin to appear in Eddie. He craves strange foods, such as decaying meat and frozen tater tots, and feels as though he is running a fever. A deep, snarling voice begins to talk to him as well. He discovers Anne and Dan out on a date, and proceeds to demonstrate his disorder by eating live lobsters while sitting in a lobster aquarium and going through other people's food. Dan and Anne decide that they must assist Eddie. Eddie has an MRI test performed on him by Dan. However, the frequency of the test results in an unpleasant distortion in Eddie's skull. Eddie is once more in pain at home because his neighbor is playing music too loudly. As Eddie tries to advise the neighbor to decline, he is mocked until the symbiote transforms his face into a horrific appearance, at which point the neighbor immediately agrees. Later, Treese and his thugs enter Eddie's house to kidnap him. Eddie makes an effort to give up, but the symbiote has other ideas. Eddie is forced to use the symbiote to fight off the mercenaries as they come at him. Drake, who is astounded that Eddie is a good fit for the symbiote, sees this footage that Treese records to brag about Eddie. In response, Eddie leaves his flat as additional mercenaries start to arrive. While he locates a motorcycle to ride, Eddie is being pursued through the city, up until Treese rams Eddie with his car. The symbiote aids him in eliminating the thugs and allowing him to move around the streets with ease. The symbiote takes over Eddie's entire body as he approaches, changing him into Venom. Another merc fires at Treese before Venom can kill him. Venom chews off his head before fleeing. Eddie ends up close to a lighthouse, and there his bones magically begin to mend. Venom, the symbiote's self-proclaimed name, speaks to Eddie and compliments him on being a good host. Nevertheless, Eddie is horrified to witness a guy having his head bit off. Eddie is instructed to obey Venom if he wants to live. Eddie as Venom scales the building where he once worked to hand-deliver evidence of Drake's crimes to his former employer. Eddie tries to flee after leaving the evidence, but the mercenaries retry to capture him. Venom fights them off and then runs away. Once she passes by Eddie's apartment and notices that it is a crime scene, Anne and Eddie meet and she brings him to Dan's office for additional assistance. She is aware of Eddie's condition. Eddie is instructed by Venom to speak with Anne since he likes her. Eddie undergoes yet another test, and Dan finds that the symbiote is a parasite. Dan informs Eddie that the symbiote and he are effectively robbing each other of life, and Anne activates a high frequency that forces the symbiote to separate from Eddie's body. Once Eddie goes, Venom escapes via the vents and attaches himself to a tiny dog. Then Treese and his men manage to capture Eddie and deliver him to Drake and surrounds his body. Eddie finds out that Drake's strategy is to return to outer space in search of more symbiotes, which he will then bring back to Earth where they will exploit humans as hosts in order to host Venom. Anne locates the dog that is doing so and proceeds to the Life Foundation. In addition to helping Eddie escape, Anne horrifies Treese by biting off her skull and then gives Eddie a kiss while transferring Venom back to him. Before Drake and Riot board the rocket, Eddie and Venom set out to find them, while Anne activates a frequency to disorient them both and force the symbiotes to abandon their hosts. The two men engage in combat utilizing their symbiote forms. Drake tries to reconnect himself when he sees Riot, but Eddie pushes him off the brink. Riot turns back and impales Eddie before boarding the rocket as it begins to take off. Eddie is located by Venom, who reattaches to him and treats Eddie's impalement wound. The rocket then explodes, killing Drake and Riot as they leap onto it as Venom tears open the fuel line. Venom appears to die in the rocket's flames as Eddie plunges into the ocean. Eddie and Anne seem to have patched up their friendship at some point after that. He discusses being asked to revive his show and host a Drake special, but he has other plans to visit a prisoner. In addition, Eddie protects Anne from knowing that Venom is still inside him. As Eddie turns to leave, he runs into an elderly man who urges him to keep fighting for the things he values. Venom also desires the man's dog for dinner. Eddie accompanies Venom while trying to convince him that if they are going to stick together, he cannot simply consume anyone and that they may only hunt down the truly evil ones. The previous thug tries to approach Mrs. Chen for money once more as soon as he enters her store. In front of Mrs. Chen, Eddie changes into Venom and devours the thug. Venom tells Eddie that they can do whatever they want in response to his question about what they should do next.